She dragged a wounded Marine up 200 stairs. The next day, 500 Marines showed up for her. There are moments in life that nobody plans for. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, "Today I am going to do something that will change my entire life forever." Nobody looks at the clock and thinks in exactly 3 hours something is going to happen that the whole world will talk about. But that is exactly what happened to a 63-year-old woman named Gloria Williams on a hot Tuesday afternoon in July. She did not know it yet. She had no idea that by the end of that day her name would be spoken in military bases across the country. She had no idea that by the next morning 500 United States Marines would be standing outside her front door. She had no clue that a single act of kindness was about to turn her quiet, invisible life into something so powerful that grown men in uniform would break down crying just hearing about it. But before we get to that moment, before we get to the Marines and the tears and the things she did on those stairs, we need to go back. We need to understand who Gloria Williams really was. Because the truth is, the most extraordinary people in this world are usually the ones nobody notices. Gloria Williams lived alone in a small apartment on the 4th floor of an old brick building in Baltimore, Maryland. The building had no elevator. It never had one. There were exactly 207 stairs from the front entrance of the building to her door. She had counted them many times over the years. Not because she wanted to, but because every single step reminded her of how tired her body had become. Gloria had bad knees. She had arthritis in both her hands. Her back gave her trouble almost every single day. Climbing those stairs took her nearly 25 minutes on a good day. On a bad day, it could take 40, but she never complained. Not once. That was the kind of woman Gloria was. She did not believe in complaining about things she could not change. She believed in doing what needed to be done and keeping her mouth shut about the pain. Gloria had lived in that apartment for over 30 years. She moved there when she was in her early 30s, right after her husband Marcus passed away. Marcus had been a Marine. He served 2 tours in Vietnam and came home with a Purple Heart and a body that never fully healed. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life. He had nightmares that would wake him up screaming in the middle of the night. But Marcus never talked about what happened over there. He just held Gloria's hand and told her that he was fine. He told her that as long as she was beside him, everything would be okay. They had 17 years together before his heart gave out one cold morning in December. Gloria found him sitting in his chair by the window, with his coffee still warm in his hand. He looked peaceful, she always said, like he had finally found the rest he had been looking for all those years. After Marcus died, Gloria never remarried. She never even thought about it. Marcus was the love of her life, and she carried him in her heart every single day. She kept his Marine uniform hanging in the closet. She kept his medals in a small wooden box on the dresser. She kept his boots by the front door as if he might walk in at any moment and put them on. Every year on Veterans Day, she would polish those boots until they shone like glass. She would press his uniform and hang it on the outside of the closet door so she could look at it all day. She would sit in his chair by the window and talk to him like he was still there. She would tell him about her day, about the neighbors, about the weather, about whatever came to her mind, and at the end of every Veterans Day, she would say the same thing. She would say, "I am so proud of you, Marcus. I will always be proud of you." Gloria worked as a cleaning lady for most of her life. She cleaned offices and schools and sometimes private homes. The work was hard on her body, but she never missed a day. She could not afford to. Her Social Security check was small and her savings were almost nothing. She needed every dollar she earned just to keep the lights on and food on the table. But even with all of that struggle, Gloria was the kind of person who always found a way to help others. If a neighbor was sick, she would bring them soup. If someone in the building could not pay their electric bill, she would quietly slip a $20 bill under their door. If a child in the neighborhood needed school supplies, she would go to the dollar store and buy what she could. She never had much, but she gave everything she had. The people in her building loved Gloria. The children called her Grandma G. The older folks called her a blessing. But outside of that small circle, nobody really knew who she was. She was invisible to the larger world. Just another elderly woman climbing stairs and cleaning floors and trying to make it through each day. Nobody wrote articles about her. Nobody gave her awards. Nobody noticed the quiet courage it took for her to get out of bed every morning and face a world that had taken so much from her. But Gloria did not need anyone to notice. She did not do good things for attention. She did them because that was who she was. Because Marcus had taught her that the measure of a person is not what they do when the world is watching. It is what they do when nobody is watching at all. On the morning of that Tuesday in July, Gloria woke up at 5:30 like she always did. She made herself a cup of coffee and sat in Marcus's chair by the window. The sun was just coming up and the streets below were mostly empty. She could hear birds singing somewhere nearby, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful. She drank her coffee slowly and talked to Marcus for a few minutes. She told him it was going to be a hot day. She told him she had 2 cleaning jobs lined up and she hoped her knees would cooperate. She told him she loved him. Then she got dressed, put on her old sneakers, grabbed her bag of cleaning supplies and headed for the stairs. Going down was always easier than going up. Her knees still ached, but gravity was on her side. She made it to the bottom in about 10 minutes and stepped outside into the already warm morning air. Her first job was at a small office building about 6 blocks away. She walked there like she always did. She could not afford the bus most days, and besides, the doctor had told her that walking was good for her joints, even though it did not feel that way. She cleaned the office from top to bottom. She mopped the floors, wiped the desks, cleaned the bathrooms, and emptied every trash can. It took her about 3 hours. The office manager, a young woman named Denise, always thanked her and told her she did a wonderful job. Gloria smiled and said thank you and moved on to her next job. Her second job that day was at a small church about 4 blocks from her apartment building. The pastor there was a kind man named Reverend Thomas who always made sure Gloria had a cold glass of water waiting for her when she arrived. That day was no different. Gloria cleaned the church for about 2 hours. She swept the pews, dusted the altar, mopped the main hall, and cleaned the small kitchen in the back. By the time she finished, it was early afternoon, and the heat outside had become brutal. The temperature was pushing past 95 degrees, and the humidity made it feel even worse. Gloria wiped the sweat from her forehead, thanked Reverend Thomas, and started the walk back to her apartment. By the time she reached her building, she was exhausted. Her knees were throbbing, her back was stiff, her hands ached from gripping the mop and the broom for hours. All she wanted was to get upstairs, take a cool shower, and rest in Marcus's chair. She pushed open the front door of the building and stepped into the lobby. The air inside was barely cooler than outside. The building's ancient cooling system had given up years ago and nobody had ever bothered to fix it. Gloria looked at the stairs and took a deep breath. 207 steps. She started climbing. She was on the second-floor landing when she heard something. At first she thought it was a dog whimpering. The sound was faint and weak. It came from somewhere above her on the stairs. Gloria stopped and listened. The sound came again. It was not a dog. It was a person. Someone was moaning in pain. Gloria felt her heart beat a little faster. She gripped the railing and started climbing again, this time a little quicker despite the pain in her knees. She rounded the corner to the stairwell between the second and third floors, and that is when she saw him. A young man was lying on the stairs. He was on his back with one leg twisted at a strange angle underneath him. His face was covered in sweat and his skin had gone pale, almost grey. He was wearing jeans and a plain white t-shirt, and one of his sneakers had come off and was lying a few steps below him. His eyes were half open, and he was breathing in short, shallow gasps. Gloria could see immediately that he was in serious trouble. She rushed to him as fast as her old legs would carry her and knelt down beside him. She put her hand on his forehead. He was burning hot, but his skin felt clammy like he was going into shock. The young man looked up at her with glassy, unfocused eyes. He tried to speak, but the words came out broken and confused. He said something about his leg. He said something about falling. Gloria looked at his leg more carefully and could see that his ankle was swollen to nearly twice its normal size. It might have been broken. She did not know for sure, but she knew it was bad. She also noticed something else. On his right arm, just below the sleeve of his t-shirt, there was a tattoo. It was the eagle, globe, and anchor, the symbol of the United States Marine Corps. Gloria felt something move deep inside her chest. This boy was a Marine, just like her Marcus. She later learned his name was Corporal James Dawson. He was 24 years old. He had recently returned from a deployment in Afghanistan where he had been injured by an improvised explosive device. The blast had damaged his left leg badly. He had gone through multiple surgeries and months of physical therapy. He had been told he might never walk normally again. But James was stubborn. He was determined to prove the doctors wrong. He had been pushing himself hard every day, walking, climbing stairs, doing exercises his physical therapist had given him. That afternoon, he had been visiting a friend who lived on the third floor of Gloria's building. On his way down the stairs, his bad leg had given out completely. He fell hard. His ankle twisted and something inside it snapped. The pain was so intense that he nearly blacked out. He managed to stay conscious, but he could not move. He lay there on those stairs in the suffocating heat, unable to get up, unable to call for help because his phone had slid out of his pocket and fallen down to the landing below. He had been there for almost 40 minutes before Gloria found him. Gloria did not have a cell phone. She had never owned one. She looked around, but the hallway was empty. The building was quiet. Most people were at work or hiding from the heat in their apartments with the doors closed. She could have gone back downstairs to the lobby where there was a payphone on the wall. She could have called for an ambulance. But that would mean leaving this young man alone on those stairs in the heat. She looked at his face. His eyes were rolling back. He was losing consciousness. Gloria made a decision in that moment, a decision that would change everything. She was going to get him upstairs to her apartment. She was going to take care of him herself until help could come. It did not matter that he was easily twice her size. It did not matter that her knees were screaming and her back was on fire and her hands could barely grip anything. It did not matter that she was 63 years old and exhausted from a full day of work. None of that mattered. What mattered was that there was a Marine lying on those stairs. And Gloria Williams was a Marine's wife. She knew what Marines did. They never left anyone behind. And she was not about to start now. She bent down and hooked her arms under his armpits. She braced her feet on the step below her and pulled. He was heavy. So heavy. She guessed he weighed about 200 pounds, maybe more. Her arms shook with the effort. Her knees screamed in protest. But she pulled. She got him up. One step, then another, then another. James was drifting in and out of consciousness. Sometimes he would moan. Sometimes he would try to help by pushing with his good leg. But mostly he was dead weight. Gloria pulled him up one step at a time. Each step felt like climbing a mountain. The sweat poured down her face and into her eyes. Her back felt like it was being torn apart. Her hands were cramping so badly she had to stop every few steps and flex her fingers just to keep them working. It took her over an hour. 1 hour to drag a 200-pound Marine up nearly 150 stairs from where she found him on the second-floor landing to her apartment on the 4th floor. 1 hour of pain and sweat and sheer willpower. By the time she reached her front door, she was shaking so badly she could barely get the key into the lock. Her legs felt like they were made of rubber. Her vision was blurring from exhaustion and dehydration. But she got that door open. She dragged James inside. She pulled him across the floor to the couch and somehow, with the last bit of strength she had, she got him up onto it. Then she collapsed on the floor beside him and could not move for 10 minutes. She lay there on the carpet, breathing hard, staring at the ceiling, trying not to cry from the pain. Every single muscle in her body was screaming. Her knees felt like they were filled with broken glass. Her back was locked up so tight she was not sure she would ever stand again. But she did stand, because that Marine on her couch needed help, and Gloria Williams was not the kind of woman who stayed down when someone needed her. She got up, went to the kitchen and got a cold, wet towel. She placed it on James's forehead. She got a bag of frozen peas from the freezer and gently placed it on his swollen ankle. She got a glass of water and held it to his lips. He drank a little. His eyes opened, and for the first time he seemed to really see her. He looked at this small, grey-haired woman standing over him with a wet towel in one hand and worry all over her face, and he whispered 2 words, "Thank you." Gloria patted his hand and said, "You just rest now, baby. I am going to get you some help." She went down the hall to her neighbor's apartment and knocked on the door. Her neighbor, a woman named Patricia, opened the door, and Gloria asked if she could use her phone to call 911. Patricia took one look at Gloria, who was drenched in sweat, shaking and barely able to stand, and immediately handed over her phone. Gloria called 911 and told them there was an injured Marine in her apartment who needed medical attention. The paramedics arrived about 15 minutes later. They had to climb all those stairs too because there was no elevator. When they walked into Gloria's apartment and saw James on the couch with the frozen peas on his ankle and the wet towel on his head, they asked Gloria what happened. She told them she found him on the stairs and brought him up. One of the paramedics, a big man named Ray, looked at Gloria, then looked at James, then looked back at Gloria. He said, "You carried him up here by yourself." Gloria said, "I did not carry him. I dragged him." "There is a difference." Ray shook his head slowly and said, "That is the most incredible thing I have ever heard." The paramedics stabilized James and carefully brought him back down the stairs on a stretcher. Before they took him out the door, James reached out and grabbed Gloria's hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear now and full of something that looked a lot like love. He said, "I do not even know your name." She said, "My name is Gloria." He said, "Gloria, I will never forget what you did for me today." She smiled and squeezed his hand and said, "You just get better, sweetheart. That is all I need." After they left, Gloria stood alone in her apartment. The place was quiet again. She looked at Marcus's chair by the window. She looked at his boots by the door. She walked over to the closet and touched the sleeve of his uniform. She whispered, "I hope I made you proud today, Marcus." Then she went to bed and fell into the deepest sleep she had in years. She had no idea what was coming tomorrow. She had no idea that what she did on those stairs was about to become one of the most talked about stories in the entire Marine Corps community. She had no idea that her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. All she knew was that a young Marine had needed help, and she had helped him. That was enough for Gloria. That had always been enough. But the story was just beginning. Gloria slept through the entire night without waking up once. That almost never happened. Most nights she would get up 2 or 3 times because of the pain in her knees or the stiffness in her back or just the loneliness that sometimes crept in during the dark hours. But that night her body was so completely drained that it shut down entirely. She slept like a stone at the bottom of a river. No dreams, no waking. Just deep, heavy nothing. When her alarm went off at 5:30 the next morning, she did not want to move. Every part of her body felt like it had been run over by a truck. Her arms were so sore she could barely lift them off the bed. Her knees felt swollen and hot. Her back was locked up tight like someone had poured concrete down her spine while she slept. She lay there for a long time just staring at the ceiling and breathing. She thought about calling in sick to her cleaning jobs. She had never done that before in her entire working life, but today seemed like a reasonable day to start. Then she thought about the bills sitting on her kitchen counter, the electric bill, the water bill, the rent that was due in 9 days. She could not afford to miss a day. She never could. So Gloria did what Gloria always did. She got up. She moved slowly and carefully like a woman twice her age, but she got up. She shuffled to the bathroom and ran hot water over her hands until the stiffness loosened enough for her to grip things. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were tired. Her face looked older than it had yesterday. But there was something else there too. Something she could not quite name. A quiet kind of pride, maybe. A feeling that she had done something that mattered. She splashed water on her face, got dressed and made her way to the kitchen to start her coffee. While the coffee brewed, she sat in Marcus's chair by the window and looked down at the street below. It was still early. The sun was just starting to come up and the street was mostly empty. A few cars passed by. A man walked his dog on the opposite sidewalk. Everything looked normal. Everything looked like every other morning she had ever watched from that window. She had no reason to think today would be any different. She drank her coffee slowly and talked to Marcus like she always did. She told him about what happened yesterday. She told him about the young Marine on the stairs. She told him about dragging James up all those steps. She told him that she saw the Eagle Globe and Anchor tattoo on the young man's arm and that it made her think of him. She said, "I could not leave him there, Marcus. You would have done the same thing. You would have done it better and faster because you were strong like that, but I did my best." She paused and looked at his boots by the door. She said, "I think he is going to be okay. I hope he is going to be okay." Gloria finished her coffee, washed the cup and put it back in the cabinet. She grabbed her bag of cleaning supplies and headed for the front door. She took a deep breath because she knew those stairs were going to be brutal today with her body in the condition it was in. She opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and started toward the stairwell. She made it about halfway down the first flight of stairs when she heard something that made her stop. It was a sound she could not immediately identify. It was coming from outside, from the street below. It was a low, rumbling murmur like a crowd of people talking all at once but in hushed voices. Gloria paused on the stairs and listened. The sound grew louder as she descended. By the time she reached the second floor, she could tell that there were a lot of people outside. More people than she had ever heard gathered on her quiet street. Her heart started beating a little faster. She did not know why, but something about that sound made her feel like something big was happening. She reached the ground floor and walked through the small lobby to the front door of the building. The door had a narrow window of frosted glass, and through it she could see shapes. Lots of shapes. People standing close together, filling up the sidewalk and spilling into the street. Gloria felt a knot form in her stomach. She did not understand what was going on. Her first thought was that something bad had happened. A fire, maybe. Or an accident. She pushed open the front door and stepped outside. What she saw made her stop breathing. The street in front of her building was filled with Marines. Not 10 or 20, hundreds of them. They stood in rows that stretched from one end of the block to the other, and around the corner, out of sight. Some were in full dress uniform, the dark blue jackets with the red trim, the white covers on their heads, the medals gleaming on their chests. Others were in camouflage fatigues. Some were in civilian clothes but wearing Marine Corps hats or shirts or jackets. They were young and old, men and women, black and white and brown. Some stood with their hands clasped behind their backs in the way that military people stand when they are being respectful. Others held small American flags. A few held hand-painted signs. One sign read, "Thank you, Gloria." Another read, "Semper Fi, Mrs. Williams." Another simply read, "Once a Marine family, always a Marine family." Gloria stood in the doorway of her building with her bag of cleaning supplies in one hand and her mouth hanging open, and she could not speak. She could not move. She could not think. She just stood there looking at all those Marines filling up her street, and she did not understand how this was possible. How did they know her name? How did they know where she lived? How did they even know what she had done? The answer to those questions had started the night before in the back of an ambulance. When the paramedics had taken James Dawson to the hospital, one of them, the big man named Ray, had been so moved by what Gloria did that he told the story to his wife when he got home that night. His wife posted about it on social media. She wrote about a 63-year-old woman who dragged a wounded Marine up 200 stairs in a building with no elevator after a full day of cleaning offices and churches. She wrote about how Gloria was a Marine's widow, who kept her husband's uniform pressed and his boots polished. She wrote about how Gloria never hesitated, never complained, never asked for anything in return. She just saw a Marine in trouble and she did what needed to be done. That post went out at about 9 o'clock in the evening. By midnight, it had been shared over 10,000 times. By 3 in the morning, it had been shared over 50,000 times. It was picked up by veterans groups and military family organizations and Marine Corps networks all across the country. People were sharing it and commenting and tagging their friends who were Marines or who had family in the military. The story spread like wildfire through a community that already understood the meaning of what Gloria had done. To the rest of the world, it was a touching story about a kind old woman. To the Marine Corps community, it was something much deeper. It was about the bond that exists between Marines and the families who love them. It was about the idea that you never leave a Marine behind, no matter who you are, no matter how old you are, no matter how much it hurts. Gloria was not a Marine herself, but she lived by their code. She carried their values in her heart, because she had carried a Marine in her heart for over 30 years. By early morning, a group of Marines from a base about 40 miles outside Baltimore had organized a plan. They reached out to other veterans groups in the area. Word spread to retired Marines living in the city. It spread to active duty Marines who happened to be on leave. It spread to Marine families and supporters and friends. The plan was simple. They were going to show up at Gloria's building the next morning, and they were going to thank her. They expected maybe 50 people, maybe 100 if they were lucky. What they got was something nobody anticipated. 512 Marines and Marine family members showed up on Gloria's street that Wednesday morning. They came from Baltimore and Washington, D.C., and Virginia and Pennsylvania, and even a few from as far away as North Carolina. Some drove through the night. Some took early morning trains. Some called in sick to work. Some brought their children. They all came for the same reason. They came because a 63-year-old woman with bad knees and a broken back had dragged one of their own up 200 stairs, and they were not going to let that go unacknowledged. Gloria stood in that doorway looking at all of those faces, and the tears started falling before she could stop them. She put her hand over her mouth and shook her head back and forth like she was trying to deny what she was seeing. This could not be real. This could not be happening. She was nobody. She was just a cleaning lady who lived alone in a fourth-floor apartment with no elevator. She was just a woman who missed her husband and polished his boots on Veterans Day. She was not the kind of person that 500 Marines showed up for. She was not the kind of person who got signs with her name on them. She was not the kind of person who mattered to the world. But she was wrong about that. Shh! She was so wrong. A man stepped forward from the front row of Marines. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair and a chest full of medals. His name was Colonel Richard Hayes, and he was retired after 32 years of service. He walked up to Gloria with slow, measured steps, and when he reached her, he did something that made everyone on that street go completely silent. He stood at attention. He raised his right hand to the brim of his cover in a crisp, sharp salute, and he held it there. Then, one by one, every Marine on that street did the same thing. 512 people came to attention and saluted a 63-year-old cleaning lady standing in the doorway of her apartment building, holding a bag of mops and rags. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the snap of flags in the morning breeze and the distant hum of the city waking up around them. Gloria stood there with tears streaming down her face, and she did not know what to do. She had never been saluted before. She did not know the protocol. She did not know that she was supposed to do anything at all. So she did the only thing that felt right. She put her hand over her heart and she bowed her head. Colonel Hayes lowered his salute and the rest of the Marines followed. He walked up to Gloria and took both of her hands in his. His eyes were red and wet. This man, who had seen combat in 3 different wars and had led thousands of Marines into battle, was standing on a sidewalk in Baltimore crying because of what a cleaning lady had done on a set of stairs. He said, "Mrs. Williams, on behalf of the United States Marine Corps and every Marine who has ever served, I want to thank you for what you did yesterday." He said, "You did not just save a Marine. You reminded all of us what this brotherhood is really about." He said, "Semper Fidelis means always faithful, and ma'am, you are the most faithful person I have ever met." Gloria could barely speak through her tears. She said, "I did not do anything special. I just helped a young man who needed help." Colonel Hayes shook his head and said, "No, ma'am. What you did was extraordinary. And we are here to make sure you know that." What happened next unfolded over several hours, and it was the kind of thing that Gloria could never have dreamed of in a million years. The Marines had not just come to salute her and say thank you. They had come to work. They had come with tools and paint and lumber and supplies. They had come with plumbers and electricians and carpenters. They had come to fix Gloria's building. Within an hour of that first salute, the entire ground floor of the building had been turned into a construction zone. Marines in work clothes were everywhere. A team of 6 was repairing the building's front steps, which had been cracked and crumbling for years. Another team was fixing the broken railing along the main stairway. Another group was painting the lobby, which had not been painted in over a decade. The walls went from a dingy, faded yellow to a clean, bright white in a matter of hours. Someone had brought a professional-grade carpet cleaner and was working on the hallway carpets that had been stained and worn thin from years of foot traffic. Someone else was replacing the light fixtures in the stairwell because half of them had burned out and the landlord had never bothered to fix them. Gloria watched all of this happening with wide eyes and a hand pressed against her chest like she was trying to keep her heart from jumping out. She kept saying, "You do not have to do this. You really do not have to do this." And every single Marine she said it to gave her the same answer. "Ma'am, it is our honor." But the work did not stop at the common areas of the building. A group of Marines asked Gloria if they could see her apartment. She was embarrassed at first. Her apartment was small and old, and everything in it was worn and faded. The furniture was decades old. The paint on the walls was peeling. The kitchen faucet had been dripping for months. The bathroom tile was cracked. The window in her bedroom did not close all the way, and in the winter cold air would seep in and make the whole room freezing. She had learned to live with all of these problems because she could not afford to fix them, and the landlord would not. But the Marines did not see a shabby apartment. They saw the home of a woman who had sacrificed everything and complained about nothing. They saw Marcus's boots by the door. They saw his uniform hanging in the closet. They saw the small wooden box of medals on the dresser. They saw the chair by the window where Gloria sat every morning and talked to a man who had been gone for 30 years. And they went to work. By noon, a team of Marines had repainted Gloria's entire apartment. Another team had fixed the kitchen faucet. and replaced the old pipes under the sink that had been corroded for years. Someone replaced the cracked bathroom tiles. Someone fixed the bedroom window so it closed properly and sealed it so no more cold air would get in. A Marine who worked as an electrician in his civilian life rewired several outlets that had been sparking and could have started a fire. Another Marine who was a carpenter built Gloria a brand new bookshelf because he noticed her books were stacked in piles on the floor since her old shelf had broken. But it was what happened in the living room that broke Gloria completely. A group of Marines carefully took Marcus's uniform out of the closet. They had it professionally pressed and placed it in a beautiful glass display case that someone had brought. They mounted the case on the wall in the living room right next to Marcus's chair by the window. They took his medals out of the old wooden box and arranged them in a shadow box with a brass plate at the bottom that read, Corporal Marcus Williams, United States Marine Corps. They placed the shadow box next to the display case, and beneath it all, on a small shelf, they placed his boots, polished to a mirror shine by Marine hands. When Gloria walked into her living room and saw what they had done, she fell to her knees. She knelt there on the floor in front of her husband's uniform and his medals and his boots, and she wept. She wept in a way she had not wept since the day Marcus died. These were not tears of sadness. These were tears of something much bigger. They were tears of being seen, of being recognized, of knowing that the man she loved and the life she had lived and the sacrifices she had made mattered to someone. She had spent 30 years being invisible. 30 years climbing those stairs alone, 30 years carrying the weight of grief and poverty and loneliness without anyone noticing. And now 500 Marines were standing in her building telling her that they saw her, that they honored her, that she mattered. A young female Marine named Sergeant Davis knelt down beside Gloria on the floor and put her arm around her. Sergeant Davis was only 26 years old and she had tears running down her own face. She said, Mrs. Williams, I want you to know something. I joined the Marines because I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be tough. I wanted to be the kind of person who could handle anything. But what you did yesterday climbing those stairs, carrying that man, that is the strongest thing I have ever heard of. You are stronger than any Marine I know. Gloria looked at her through her tears and said, Sweetheart, I am just an old woman with bad knees. Sergeant Davis shook her head and said, No, ma'am, you are a warrior. You just do not wear the uniform. Throughout the day, more people kept arriving. News crews showed up with cameras and microphones. Reporters wanted to talk to Gloria, but she was shy and uncomfortable with the attention. She did a few short interviews, mostly because the Marines encouraged her to. She said the same thing in every interview. She said, I did not do anything anyone else would not have done. I saw a young man who needed help, and I helped him. That is what people are supposed to do. When a reporter asked her if she thought about the difficulty of dragging a 200-pound man up all those stairs at her age with her physical problems, Gloria paused for a moment. Then she said, When I saw that tattoo on his arm, the Marine tattoo, I thought about my husband. My husband was a Marine. And I know that if Marcus was lying on those stairs somewhere, I would want someone to help him. So I helped that boy the way I would want someone to help my Marcus. That was all there was to it. But to the Marines and to the millions of people who would eventually see Gloria's story there was so much more to it than that. There was something about the simplicity of what she did that cut through all the noise and all the cynicism and all the division that seemed to fill the world. In a time when people argued about everything and trusted nothing, here was a 63-year-old woman who did not think about politics or opinions or what anyone would say about her. She just saw a person in need and she acted. She did not wait for someone else to do it. She did not call a committee or post about it online or weigh the risks and benefits. She just bent down and grabbed hold and pulled, step by step, one at a time, until the job was done. Later that afternoon, James Dawson arrived. He came in a wheelchair pushed by his older brother, Michael. His ankle was in a cast and his leg was propped up, but his eyes were bright and clear and full of emotion. When the Marines saw him coming down the street, they parted to make a path for him like the Red Sea opening up. James wheeled through that corridor of Marines with his jaw clenched tight, trying not to cry. He made it all the way to Gloria's building, where she was standing in the doorway watching him approach. When he reached her, he locked the wheels of his wheelchair and tried to stand up. His brother told him to stay seated, but James would not listen. He grabbed the armrests and pushed himself up onto his good leg. He stood there wobbling and unsteady, and he looked at Gloria with eyes that were overflowing. He said, I woke up this morning and the first thing I thought about was you. He said, I have been through a lot in my life. I have been blown up by a bomb in Afghanistan. I have had surgeries that I thought would kill me. I have been in pain every single day for 2 years. But yesterday when I was lying on those stairs, I was more scared than I have ever been. I thought I was going to die there alone in that stairwell, and nobody would even know. And then you came." He stopped talking because his voice broke and the tears started falling. "He said you came and you did not leave me. You could have left. You could have gone for help. But you stayed and you carried me and you saved my life." Gloria stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. She was so small compared to him. The top of her head barely reached his chest, but she held him tight, and he buried his face in her shoulder and cried. 500 Marines stood watching this moment in total silence. Many of them were crying too. These were men and women who had been trained to be tough, who had been taught to push through pain and fear and exhaustion, who had seen terrible things in terrible places. And they were standing on a street in Baltimore weeping because a grandmother was hugging a broken young Marine, and the beauty of it was almost too much to bear. When James finally pulled back, he reached into his pocket and took out something small. It was a challenge coin. For those who do not know, a challenge coin is a special coin carried by military members that represents their unit and their service. It is one of the most meaningful things a Marine can give to another person. James pressed the coin into Gloria's hand and closed her fingers around it. He said, "This is my unit coin. I want you to have it." Gloria looked down at the coin in her hand. She turned it over and read the inscription on the back. It said, "United States Marine Corps 2nd Battalion 8th Marines." She closed her hand around it and pressed it against her heart. She said, "I will keep this forever. I will put it right next to Marcus's medals." James smiled through his tears and said he would like that. He said, "I never met your husband, Mrs. Williams, but I know he was a great man. Because a great man is the only kind of man who could have deserved a woman like you." The sun was getting low in the sky by then, and the crowd was beginning to thin. Marines were packing up their tools and cleaning up the work sites. The building looked transformed. The stairs had new railings. The walls were freshly painted. The lights worked. The hallways were clean. Gloria's apartment was repaired and beautiful, but something far more important than any physical repair had happened that day. A community had come together. Strangers had become family. And a woman who had spent 30 years being invisible had been seen by 500 pairs of eyes, and every single pair had looked at her with love. As the last of the Marines prepared to leave, Gloria stood at the entrance of her building and shook every hand. She hugged every person who wanted a hug. She thanked every single one of them, even though they kept telling her that she was the one who should be thanked. She stood there until the street was empty and the sun was setting orange and red over the rooftops of Baltimore. Then she turned and looked at the stairs, 207 steps. The same stairs she had climbed every day for 30 years. The same stairs where she had found James. The same stairs where she had done the impossible. She took a deep breath and started climbing. Her knees hurt, her back ached. But the railing was new and strong, and she held onto it and went up, one step at a time. When she reached her apartment, she opened the door and stepped inside. The first thing she saw was Marcus's uniform in the glass case on the wall, his medals in the shadow box, his boots on the shelf below, polished to perfection. She walked over and touched the glass gently. She whispered, "Did you see that, Marcus? Did you see all those Marines? They came for us, baby. They came for us." She sat down in his chair by the window and looked out at the empty street below. The cleaning supplies she had been carrying that morning were still sitting by the front door where she had dropped them. She had not made it to either of her cleaning jobs today. She would lose a day's pay. She knew that. But sitting there in that chair with Marcus's uniform on the wall and James's challenge coin in her hand, and the memory of 500 Marines saluting her still fresh in her mind, she did not care about the money. For the first time in a very long time, Gloria Williams did not feel invisible. She did not feel alone. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. But the story was far from over. Because what happened in the days and weeks that followed would take everything to a level that nobody, not Gloria, not the Marines, not anyone could have predicted. The world was about to discover Gloria Williams, and the world was about to give back to her in ways that would bring her to her knees all over again. The morning after the Marines came, Gloria woke up and for a few seconds she forgot everything that had happened. Her body told her it was just another day. The alarm went off at 5:30. The room was still dark. Her knees ached the way they always did. But then she opened her eyes and saw the glass display case on the wall, Marcus's uniform pressed and perfect behind the glass. his medals arranged in a row, his boots gleaming on the shelf below, and it all came rushing back, the stairs. James, the 500 Marines standing in her street. The salute, the tears. The coin that James pressed into her hand. She reached over to the nightstand and felt for the coin. It was there, right where she had placed it before falling asleep. She picked it up and held it against her chest and lay there in the early morning darkness, just breathing. Gloria got up and made her coffee and sat in Marcus's chair. The street below was quiet again. No Marines, no signs, no cameras. Just the normal early morning stillness that she had known for 30 years. Part of her wondered if yesterday had been a dream, a beautiful, impossible dream that her tired old mind had invented to give her something to hold on to. But the fresh paint on her walls was real. The new railing on the stairs was real. The coin in her hand was real. It all happened. Every bit of it. She talked to Marcus that morning the way she always did, but this time she had so much more to say. She told him about Colonel Hayes and the salute. She told him about Sergeant Davis, who called her a warrior. She told him about the young Marines who painted her walls and fixed her faucet and sealed her bedroom window. She told him about the shadow box and how they arranged his medals so carefully, like each one was made of gold. She told him about James standing up from his wheelchair, even though his brother told him not to, because he wanted to look her in the eye when he thanked her. She said, "Marcus, I wish you could have seen it. I wish you could have been there." Then she paused and smiled to herself. She said, "Maybe you were there. Maybe you sent them to me. That sounds like something you would do." Gloria went to work that day because she had to. The bills had not changed just because 500 Marines showed up on her street. She still had rent to pay and food to buy and electricity to keep on. She cleaned the office building and she cleaned the church just like she always did. Reverend Thomas asked her about the Marines because he had heard about it from Patricia, who had heard about it from someone else. News traveled fast in their neighborhood. Gloria told him a short version of the story, and Reverend Thomas shook his head and said, "The Lord works in mysterious ways, Gloria." She said, "Yes, he does, Reverend. Yes, he does." But while Gloria was mopping floors and wiping desks, the story of what she did was spreading far beyond Baltimore. The social media post that Ray, the paramedic's wife, had written had now been shared over 200,000 times. It had been picked up by local news stations in Maryland and then by national outlets. Reporters from major networks were calling the building trying to reach Gloria, but she did not have a phone, and her neighbors were protective of her privacy. A producer from a nationally syndicated morning show called the church looking for her, and Reverend Thomas politely told them that Gloria was a private person and did not want all this attention. But the story had taken on a life of its own. It was bigger than Gloria now. It belonged to the world. By the end of that first week, millions of people had seen Gloria's story. Videos of the Marines saluting her had been posted online, and they were everywhere. People were sharing them with captions like, "This is what America is supposed to look like," and "This woman is a national treasure." Comment sections were filled with people crying and saying they had never been so moved by anything in their lives. Veterans were posting their own stories about times when civilians had shown them kindness. Marine families were posting about how the story reminded them of their own mothers and grandmothers. The story crossed every line that usually divides people. It did not matter what political party someone belonged to, or what their beliefs were, or where they came from. Gloria's story was universal. It was about love and sacrifice and doing the right thing when nobody is watching. And people were hungry for that kind of story. They were starving for it. A GoFundMe page was created for Gloria by a Marine veteran named Anthony Brooks, who had been one of the 500 who showed up at her building. He did not ask Gloria's permission first because he knew she would say no. Gloria would never ask anyone for money. She would rather starve than accept charity. That was just how she was. But Anthony also knew that Gloria was barely surviving. He knew about the cleaning jobs and the bad knees and the Social Security check that did not cover half her expenses. He knew about the 30 years of struggling alone in that apartment, so he set up the page with a goal of $10,000. He figured that amount would help her catch up on some bills and maybe buy herself something nice for once in her life. The page raised $10,000 in less than 4 hours. By the end of the first day, it had raised over $75,000. By the end of the week, it had crossed $200,000. People were donating from every state in the country and from countries around the world. Donations came in amounts ranging from $5 to $5,000. Every single one came with a message. Some of the messages were short. God bless you, Gloria. Some were long and deeply personal. People wrote about their own fathers and mothers and grandparents who had served. They wrote about loved ones they had lost. They wrote about the meaning of sacrifice and how Gloria's story had reminded them of what truly matters. A woman from Texas wrote, "My father was a Marine and he passed away last year. Your story made me feel like he was still here. Thank you for reminding me of his love." A man from Oregon wrote, "I am a combat veteran and I have been struggling. I saw your story, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like people still care. You saved more than one Marine, Mrs. Williams. You saved a lot of us." When Gloria found out about the GoFundMe page, she was upset at first. She told Anthony she did not need charity and she did not want people's money. Anthony sat down with her in her apartment and explained that this was not charity. He said, "Gloria, these people are not giving you money because they feel sorry for you. They are giving you money because you inspired them. You gave them something and they want to give something back. That is not charity. That is gratitude." Gloria thought about that for a long time. She sat in Marcus's chair and looked at his uniform in the case, and she thought about what Marcus would say. She decided he would tell her to accept it gracefully. So she did. But Gloria, being Gloria, she did not keep all the money for herself. The total eventually reached over $350,000. Gloria used a portion of it to pay off all of her bills and put some into savings so she would never have to worry about keeping the lights on again. She used some of it to buy herself a few things she needed, including a new pair of shoes because her old sneakers were falling apart, and a warm winter coat because her old one had holes in it, but the rest of it she gave away. She donated money to veterans organizations. She donated to the church where she cleaned. She set up a small fund for children in her neighborhood who needed school supplies. She paid off Patricia's electric bill and bought new furniture for an elderly couple on the second floor whose couch had been broken for years. When people asked her why she gave so much away, she said, "Because I know what it feels like to need help and have nobody there. If I can be there for someone else, then that is what I am going to do." The national attention brought other opportunities that Gloria never expected. A home improvement company based in Maryland heard about her story and offered to install an elevator in her building completely free of charge. The building owner, who had ignored maintenance requests for years, suddenly found himself under public pressure and agreed to allow the installation. It took about 3 months, but when it was finished, Gloria had something she had never had in 30 years of living there. She could get to her apartment without climbing a single stair. The first time she rode that elevator up to the 4th floor, she stood inside it with her eyes closed and her hand over her heart. She thought about all the mornings she had climbed those stairs in pain. All the evening she had dragged herself up step by step after a long day of work. All the times her knees had buckled and she had to stop and rest on the landing because she did not think she could go any further. Those days were over now, and it all started because she stopped on those stairs to help a stranger. James Dawson recovered well from his ankle injury. The break was clean, and after 8 weeks in a cast and several more weeks of physical therapy, he was walking again. His overall recovery from the Afghanistan injuries continued, and while he would always have some limitations, he made progress that even his doctors said was remarkable. He credited Gloria for that. He said that when he was lying on those stairs, unable to move, convinced that he was going to die in that hot stairwell, it was Gloria who gave him hope. He said she did not just save his body, she saved his spirit. She made him believe that the world still had good people in it, and that he was not alone, and that his life was worth fighting for. James visited Gloria regularly. He would come by her apartment usually once a week, sometimes more. They would sit together in the living room, Gloria in Marcus's chair and James on the new couch that the Marines had bought for her, and they would talk. Sometimes they talked about Marcus. Gloria loved telling James stories about her husband. She told him about how Marcus proposed to her in the rain outside a movie theater. She told him about how Marcus used to sing old Motown songs while he cooked breakfast on Sunday mornings. She told him about the way Marcus would hold her hand during thunderstorms, not because she was scared, but because he was. And he did not want her to know. James listened to every story with full attention, and sometimes he would laugh, and sometimes he would get quiet, and sometimes he would just say he sounds like an amazing man. And Gloria would nod and say he was the best man I ever knew. Sometimes they talked about James's experience in Afghanistan. He did not share everything. There were parts he could not talk about yet. But he told Gloria about some of it. He told her about the day the IED went off and how the last thing he remembered before everything went black was the sound of his best friend screaming his name. He told her about waking up in a military hospital not knowing where he was or what had happened to his legs. He told her about the long months of recovery and the pain and the anger and the depression that nearly swallowed him whole. He told her about the dark days when he thought about giving up entirely. Gloria listened to all of it without flinching. She did not try to fix it or minimize it or tell him everything was going to be fine. She just listened. And sometimes that is the most powerful thing a person can do. Just be there. Just listen. Just let someone know that their pain matters and that they are not carrying it alone. Their bond grew into something that defied simple description. James started calling Gloria his second mother. Gloria started calling James her boy. When James's actual mother came to visit from North Carolina, she hugged Gloria for a long time and said through tears, "Thank you for saving my son." Gloria said he saved me too, and she meant it, because the truth was that before James fell on those stairs, Gloria had been fading. She had been getting smaller and quieter with each passing year. The loneliness had been eating away at her slowly like water wearing down stone. She went through the motions of her life, but the spark had been dimming. She cleaned and she climbed and she talked to Marcus, but the world felt grayer and colder with each passing season. James changed that. The Marines changed that. Being seen and loved and valued changed that. Gloria was not fading anymore. She was glowing. The story continued to ripple outward in ways that nobody could have predicted. A documentary filmmaker named Sarah Chen reached out and asked if she could make a short film about Gloria. Gloria was hesitant, but James and Anthony and several of the Marines encouraged her to do it. They said her story needed to be told not for her sake, but for the sake of everyone who would hear it and be changed by it. Gloria agreed. The documentary was completed about 6 months later, and it was called 200 Stairs. It premiered at a film festival and received a standing ovation. It went on to be shown at veterans events and military installations around the country. It was eventually made available online, where it was viewed millions of times. In the film, Gloria sat in Marcus's chair and told her story in her own words. She talked about Marcus and their life together. She talked about losing him and the 30 years of grief that followed. She talked about the cleaning jobs and the stairs and the loneliness. She talked about finding James and the decision she made in that moment to drag him upstairs. She talked about the Marines showing up and how it felt to be seen for the first time in decades. She talked about what she had learned from all of it. There was one moment in the documentary that people talked about more than any other. The filmmaker asked Gloria a simple question. She asked, "Why did you do it? Why did you drag that man up all those stairs when you could have just gone for help?" Gloria was quiet for a long time. She looked at Marcus's uniform in the glass case. She looked at his boots. She looked at the challenge coin that James had given her, which she had placed right next to Marcus's purple heart in the shadow box. And then she said something that made everyone who heard it stop and think about their own life. She said, "Because stairs, they are just steps. You go up one, and then you go up another, and then you go up another. That is all life is really. Just one step at a time. And sometimes the steps are hard. Sometimes they hurt so bad you think you cannot take one more. But you take it anyway. Because there is always somebody counting on you to get to the top. There is always somebody who needs you to keep climbing." Marcus taught me that. He climbed his stairs every single day, even when the war was still in his head, even when his body was broken, even when he was scared. He kept climbing because he had me waiting for him at the top. And that boy on those stairs, that Marine, he needed someone waiting for him at the top too. So I became that person. I decided I was going to get him to the top no matter what. Because that is what love does. Love climbs. Those last two words became something of a motto. Love climbs. People got it tattooed on their arms. They printed it on t-shirts and bumper stickers and challenge coins. It was quoted in speeches at Marine Corps events and veterans ceremonies. It was painted on the wall of a rehabilitation center for wounded veterans in Virginia. Two simple words from a 63-year-old cleaning lady that captured something profound about the human spirit and what it means to show up for another person even when it costs you everything. Gloria's life settled into a new rhythm after the dust settled. She retired from cleaning. The money from the GoFundMe and the modest income from the documentary allowed her to live comfortably for the first time in her adult life. She did not become extravagant. She was still Gloria. She still wore simple clothes and ate simple food, and sat in Marcus's chair every morning to drink her coffee. and talk to the man she loved. But the heaviness was gone. The loneliness had been replaced by connection. James came to visit. Maureen stopped by when they were in the area. Neighbors knocked on her door just to check on her and sit with her for a while. Children in the building still called her Grandma G, but now they knew her story, and they looked at her with a kind of awe that made her uncomfortable and proud at the same time. Gloria began speaking at schools and community events in the Baltimore area. She was not a polished speaker. She did not use big words or dramatic gestures. She just stood up in front of people and told the truth about her life. She talked about losing Marcus and how grief nearly destroyed her. She talked about the years of invisibility and how easy it is to disappear when the world stops looking at you. She talked about the stairs and James and the Marines. And she always ended with the same message. She said, "You do not have to be strong to help somebody. You do not have to be young or fast or powerful. You just have to decide that you are not going to walk past someone who needs you. You just have to decide to stop and reach down and pull. That is all it takes. Just that one decision." James Dawson went on to become an advocate for wounded veterans. He worked with organizations that helped service members transition back to civilian life. He spoke openly about his own struggles with injury and depression, and he credited Gloria with being the turning point in his recovery. He said that when he was lying on those stairs, he had been in a dark place for a long time. He said he had been wondering if his life still had meaning and whether anyone in the world cared whether he lived or died. And then an old woman with bad knees appeared above him like an angel in sneakers and decided that his life was worth climbing 200 stairs for. That changed everything for him. That gave him a reason to keep going. Every year on the anniversary of the day they met, James would come to Gloria's apartment. He would bring flowers, and they would sit together and eat dinner and talk about Marcus and about life and about the strange, beautiful way the universe sometimes puts people exactly where they need to be. James would always thank her again for what she did, and Gloria would always say the same thing. She would say, "Stop thanking me, James. I am the one who should be thanking you. You gave me a reason to climb those stairs one more time. And look what was waiting at the top." There is something about Gloria's story that stays with people long after they hear it. It is not the physical act itself, although that was extraordinary. A 63-year-old woman with arthritis and bad knees dragging a 200-pound Marine up flight after flight of stairs in brutal heat after working all day. That alone is the kind of thing that seems impossible until someone actually does it. But the real power of the story is not in the physical feat. It is in the moment of decision. That instant when Gloria saw James lying on those stairs and chose not to walk past him. She could have. Nobody would have blamed her. She was old and tired and hurting, and it would have been perfectly reasonable for her to go downstairs and call for help and wait. But she did not do the reasonable thing. She did the right thing. And there is a difference between those two things that most people spend their whole lives trying to understand. The reasonable thing is the thing that makes sense on paper, the thing that protects you, the thing that keeps you safe and comfortable and free from risk. The right thing is the thing that costs you something, the thing that asks you to give more than you think you have, the thing that might break you but you do it anyway because something inside you knows that this is what you were put on this earth to do. Gloria did the right thing, and it nearly broke her body, but it healed something inside her that had been broken for 30 years. Marcus Williams served his country with honor. He gave his body and his peace of mind to protect people he would never meet. He came home damaged but undefeated. He lived his life with quiet dignity, and he loved his wife with everything he had. When he died, he left behind a woman who carried his legacy not in a frame on the wall, but in every single thing she did. Gloria did not need a uniform to be a Marine. She carried the values in her bones. Courage, honor, commitment, semper fidelis, always faithful. She was always faithful to Marcus, and on that hot Tuesday afternoon she was faithful to a stranger on the stairs who happened to carry the same eagle globe and anchor that her husband had carried. That is the story of Gloria Williams, a cleaning lady from Baltimore who dragged a wounded Marine up 200 stairs and woke up the next morning to find 500 Marines standing on her street. It is a story about love and loss and loneliness, and what happens when ordinary people do extraordinary things. It is a story about stairs and the courage it takes to keep climbing. And it is a story about two words that a 63-year-old woman said in a documentary that will echo in the hearts of everyone who hears them for a very long time. Love climbs. It always has. It always will. And as long as there are people like Gloria Williams in this world, it always will.